Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to push past, the usual political and economic arguments that really defined the 2014 Scottish independence referendum.
Yeah, the headlines, the macro stuff.
Exactly. We're wading into something else, the cultural engine that drove the Yes movement. It's a story that often gets sidelined, but it really tells you about the passion, the identity, the democratic hopes behind it all.
Oh, absolutely. It's so crucial. We look beyond just GDP figures and currency debates. The sources you've shared, they show this incredibly enthusiastic, imaginative campaign. It was waged by this huge network of artists, writers, musicians.
Right.
And for these people, you see, independence wasn't just a political shift. They saw it as, well, a necessary cultural dawn, something long overdue.
And you can feel that momentum, can't you? Right from the start. There's that great story about the early days. Ross Coffin, one of the founders of the main cultural group, we'll talk about. He was challenged by a friend, a no voter, to name 20 well-known artists who backed independence.
Sure.
Publicly.
And let me guess, he managed it.
He didn't stop at 20. He quickly hit 50.
Wow. 50.
Yeah. So what started as this, casual challenge kind of revealed this hidden truth. There was this huge wave of artistic support just waiting to be, mobilized.
And that list just kept growing, didn't it? It became a public thing. Nearly 120 prominent names in the end.
Made that cultural momentum pretty hard to ignore.
Undeniable, yeah.
So our mission today, it's pretty ambitious. We're going to unpack the founding ideas, the different reasons people got involved, and the impact, really, of this cultural campaign. We'll focus particularly on the National Collective.
Right, the NF.
We want to offer you a shortcut, essentially, to understanding the heart and the passion, all those non-economic arguments that fuel the yes vote, drawing straight from what these artists and creatives actually said and did. Okay, so let's dive into the organization right at the center of this. The National Collective, or NC. Now, the independence movement obviously had political parties driving it, so what exactly was the gap this non-party group of artists was trying to fill?
Well, that non-party bit is key. The National Collective explicitly defined itself as open and non-party. It brought together artists, creatives, between 2011 and 2015?
Right.
And it was properly grassroots. Founded by 3 young people, Ross Culkin, Andrew Redmond Barr, and Rory Scawthorne. And their mission, it was incredibly aspirational. They aimed to, and this is their phrase, shape the vision of a new society and nation.
That's huge for a small volunteer group. I mean, they weren't just talking about tweaks to policy, were they?
No, not at all. This was about fundamental societal redesign. They saw their role as kind of ushering in a cultural dawn.
Cultural dawn.
Yeah. They felt that for real political change to happen, meaningful change, it had to be underpinned by this psychological shift first.
So it starts with culture.
That was the idea. And Culkin, he literally started it from a laptop in his bedroom. But the growth was just staggering.
Really? How big did it get?
By the end of the campaign, they'd shot up to over 4,000 members.
4,000? Wow.
Yeah. And that scale, it led people like Andrew Whitaker, who was a political correspondent for the Scotsman newspaper, to call them the single most significant cultural voice in the whole referendum debate.
Okay, so the most significant cultural voice. But if they're staying away from party politics, how did they actually translate that cultural energy into, practical political action? How did they get people involved?
Their whole approach was what they called doing politics differently. They specifically rejected, the standard political rally, the dry speeches.
Okay.
Their main tools were things like the written word, art installations, performance, social media, obviously, and lots of decentralized grassroots events. The whole strategy was designed to fight that deep political apathy you often see and motivate real change, especially among voters who felt, pretty alienated by traditional Westminster politics.
Right, trying to reach people who'd switched off.
Yeah.
And the most visible example of this different approach must have been the Yestival, right?
Oh, the Yestival. That was a huge undertaking, both logistically and as a cultural statement. It was this month-long, nationwide, pro-independence cultural festival. Ran right through the summer of 2014, a really crucial period.
A month long across the whole country.
Yeah. And the stated goal was to showcase just how deep and wide Scottish grassroots culture went, and through that, to instill what they called cultural confidence in potential voters.
So not hitting people over the head with stats, but celebrating what was already there.
Exactly. Celebrating what Scotland was and what it could be.
And this wasn't just like Glasgow and Edinburgh, was it? They really went everywhere.
No, they made a real point of that. They covered every major city, sure, but crucially, they went out to remote areas, too.
Like where?
They held events in places like Shetland, the Western Isles, the Borders, Dumfries and Galloway up in the Highlands. It was comprehensive.
Really trying to show it wasn't just a Central Belt thing.
Precisely. And the events themselves were incredibly varied. You had literary readings, film screenings, big music events with well-known artists like Julie Fowlis, the folk singer, and playwright David Grieg. This whole decentralized approach, it showed this kind of self-generating energy that really challenged that London-centric view of what's culturally important.
Okay, so that's the physical events, but then you mentioned social media. They seemed to just completely own that space, didn't they?
They absolutely nailed social media activism. Their big win there was starting the #YesBecause hashtag campaign. It was huge.
Right, I remember that.
And the genius of it was its positive framing. That was a deliberate strategic choice. They wanted to contrast sharply with the opposition campaign, which got labeled Project Fear. The NC aimed to, as they put it, make politics fun again, using creativity, humor, wit, alongside, genuine political points.
But hang on, if the other side, Better Together, was all about stability, the economy, was humor and wit really effective in swaying undecided voters?
What?
Wasn't there a risk it looked a bit frivolous?
That's a fair question. But the sources suggest the humor was actually quite strategic. It worked to sort of diffuse the perceived negativity and, well, fear-mongering from the other side.
So using laughter to counter the fear.
Kind of, yeah. By using wit, they managed to normalize the whole idea of independence, made it seem aspirational, relatable, not just this big, scary political gamble, and the data backed it up. Analytical websites tracked it within 24 hours of launching. #YesBecause had been used over 61,000 times.
61,000 in a day.
Yeah. Compare that to the opposing #NoBecause hashtag that only got about 1,700 uses.
Wow. Quite a difference.
It showed that aspiration was really trending,
This commitment to doing things differently, outside the usual political channels, it also dragged the National Collective into quite a serious legal fight, didn't it? The veto controversy really underlined that David versus Goliath feeling.
Yes, that was a defining moment for them. The NC published an article that criticized Ian Taylor. He was the CEO of Vitol, this massive global commodity trading firm.
And Taylor was a big donor to the other side. A huge donor. Hundreds of thousands of pounds given to the Better Together campaign.
Okay, so what was the criticism that sparked the legal threat?
Well, the Ntosi article basically questioned the ethics of the No campaign, taking such large sums from a global commodity trader. It suggested that corporate interests, particularly, oil and gas interests, were trying to maintain the status quo for their own benefit.
Right.
The critique wasn't exactly subtle. It implied the donation was about protecting the donor's business from potential policy changes if Scotland became independent. And the response was swift, a legal threat claiming the article was grossly defamatory.
That sounds like a classic attempt to shut down a smaller voice. They did take the website down briefly, didn't they? Which must have looked bad.
It did, yes, temporarily. But their public response was immediate and, frankly, defiant. They put out a statement saying they will not be bullied or silenced.
Good for them. And they framed the whole legal action as an attempt by these powerful, shadowy corporate interests to crush grassroots democracy. It was actually a brilliant tactical move. They got high-profile legal support, like the lawyer Amr Anwar, and they quickly turned the legal threat itself into a weapon.
How did they do that?
They basically flipped it into an endorsement issue. They attacked the opposition's financial integrity.
Ah, clever.
Exactly. They successfully petitioned the Scottish Parliament, demanding that Better Together return the donation, arguing that taking that kind of money tainted the campaign's integrity. As the writer Gerry Hassan pointed out, it just reinforced the NC's core narrative, that they were the ordinary people fighting against a narrow, self-serving elite who benefited from the union staying as it was.
So the attempt to silence them actually ended up amplifying their message.
Massively, yeah.
And finally, on the NC strategy, they had this strong internationalist outlook, didn't they? Which seems important for countering those fears about an independent Scotland being isolated.
Very important. And they were really strategic about it. They focused heavily on the Nordic countries, Denmark, Iceland, Sweden, they actively sought out and published interviews with key figures from those countries.
Why the Nordics specifically?
Because the Nordic model, small, prosperous, socially democratic states, was the perfect counterargument to the claim that Scotland was too wee, too poor, too stupid to succeed on its own.
Right, holding them up as an example.
Yeah.
What specific reassurances did they get from these international figures?
Well, a major fear pushed by the No campaign was that Scotland would be shut out of big international bodies like the EU or NATO.
Yeah, that was a big one.
So the NC made sure to highlight quotes like one from Iceland's prime minister at the time, Sigmundur Davíð. He said Iceland would welcome Scotland with a new, thriving relationship. Even more crucially, they pointed to Danish politicians and academics who were saying that Scotland's entry into the EU and NATO would likely be swift and straightforward.
Directly challenging the No campaign's narrative.
Directly. It undermined one of their main scare tactics about isolation and border problems. The NC painted this picture of a nation ready and able to take its place on the world stage.
Okay, so we've established the national collective was this powerful force for mobilizing cultural feeling. Now let's drill down into why. Why did all these hundreds of artists, writers, musicians actually support independence? It clearly wasn't just one single thing.
No, definitely not. When you look at the statements in the work, you see sort of three main clusters of reasons, three big themes that kept coming up, though they often overlapped, of course.
Right, so let's take theme A first, democracy, frustration, and maturation.
Yeah, maturation. This is really the political argument, but it's viewed through a much more personal democratic lens. The biggest single grievance, overwhelmingly, was this feeling of a democratic disconnect.
The Westminster disconnect.
Exactly. So many Scots felt they were just perpetually ruled by governments they hadn't voted for. The fiddler Ali Bain put it very plainly. He said he'd lived too many years under Westminster governments that neither he nor the majority in Scotland had actually elected. And he basically asked, how can that keep happening? How is that acceptable in a modern democracy?
And the actor Martin Compston said something similar, didn't he? About growing up under Tory governments Scotland kept rejecting.
He did. Recalled that deep frustration. And the novelist Alan Bissett, who we'll talk more about later, he famously summed up that feeling as the fear of Scotland being shackling them to the Tories again and again.
So faced with that frustration, artists started framing independence as growing up.
Yes, that metaphor comes up a lot. The writer and artist Alistair Gray, always sharp, and the children's author Laurie Dunn, both talked about maturity. They argued the Union created this infantilizing effect of Westminster rule.
Infantilizing.
Yeah, like Scotland was being treated as a dependency, unable to control its own money, its own future. Independence, in this view, was about forcing Scotland to finally take responsibility, to own its successes, but also own its mistakes.
That's interesting. So less about angry divorce, more about reaching political adulthood?
Yeah.
And that led some creatives to think about the Union itself as a relationship, right?
Absolutely. That relationship analogy really struck a chord in the creative community. The writer A.L. Kennedy made the point, when one partner, meaning Westminster, seems halfway up the door already, maybe the relationship has just had its day.
That kind of natural end.
Yeah, it frames it as a natural, if maybe difficult, transition rather than this huge political battle. And the playwright, David Grieg, saw the Union like a long marriage that had simply run its course. He described separation not as this bitter divorce, but almost as a great sigh of relief, because the partners had just drifted apart and needed different paths forward.
So if the core argument isn't really economic, what's the fundamental drive? James Kelman seemed to boil it right down, didn't he?
Kelman cut through all the noise. He insisted the decision wasn't, and shouldn't be, primarily about short-term economics, cost-benefit analyses. For him, it was fundamentally about self-respect, national determination.
Self-respect.
Yeah, he basically challenged the whole basis of the debate. Why should Scotland even need a debate about controlling its own existence? He argued the goal was simply the normalization of Scotland as a self-governing country, which he saw as a basic right for any nation.
Which leads us neatly into Theme B policy priorities. Because for many, this wasn't abstract. It was about specific policies, often linked to social justice and peace. The case was purely moral for some.
And the absolute clearest moral red line for so many creatives was the nuclear issue, Trident.
Right, the UK's nuclear weapons based in Scotland.
Based on the Clyde, yes. This was just decisive for so many. Photographer Alan McCready, actor James Cosmo, they both explicitly cited getting rid of those weapons as a key personal reason for voting. Yes. They just rejected being part of a country that insisted on occupying what they call the moral wasteland of possessing WMDs, often against the clear wishes of the Scottish electorate.
And others, like Callum Stewart, linked it not just to removing Trident, but also refusing to be dragged into future, quote, illegal wars, given the UK's recent history.
Yeah, that fed into it too. And this moral dimension extended deeply into domestic policy as well, often driven by this visceral rejection of what they saw as neoliberalism.
Okay, neoliberalism. We should probably clarify what that meant in the context of 2014.
Good point. In this context, it referred to that free market, minimal state ideology that had really dominated UK policy for decades, but particularly the austerity policies that followed the 2008 financial crash.
So things like cuts to public services.
Exactly, tangible things. The singer Corinne Polwart and the researcher Mary McFadden, they talked about feeling this visceral alienation from UK policies they believed fostered cruelty, indignity, and inequality.
Strong words.
Very. They were reacting to specific things like cuts to the welfare state, remember the controversy around the bedroom tax, and just the general climate of austerity and privatization they feared was chipping away at essential services. For them, independence was a chance to reassert what they saw as core communitarian, egalitarian values.
So building a sort of protective shield around Scottish social values.
That's a good way to put it. The fairness agenda was absolutely central for many. The harpist Karina Hewitt, singer Finlay Napier, they focused on independence as a way to protect and secure devolved institutions. The NHS, the welfare state, free university tuition, things they worried were being aggressively dismantled or sold off down south.
Yep.
And the singer Fi Vass made a really interesting point. She linked Scotland's consistent voting patterns, historically tending to vote against governments that favored, wealth flowing upwards to a desire for a fairer distribution of resources. She argued that would lead to a happier, more stable society overall.
Okay, which brings us to the third theme. Theme C, cultural confidence and internationalism. This feels maybe the most personal for the creator community itself, but also quite visionary.
Yeah, this one speaks directly to that desire for self-expression, for cultural validation on their own terms. John Wallace, who used to be the principal of the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama, he argued that devolution had already boosted Scotland's cultural confidence, but independence would make it skyrocket. He predicted this whole new wave of creativity being unleashed, and lots of others echoed that. Alan Cumming, the actor, for instance.
So a feeling that their professional lives were maybe being held back by London's influence, that they wanted to nurture Scottish talent more directly.
That's definitely part of it. The fiddler, Adam Sutherland, talked about a new respect for our own traditional music emerging, which fed into this growing sense of collective self-worth. And crucially, Kyle Falconer from the band The View, he wanted more control over broadcasting.
Radio and TV.
Yeah. To ensure Scottish music, film, arts got better airplay, better representation, shifting the focus, financial and cultural, away from a system dominated by London. This wasn't just about pride. For many, it was about the practicalities of sustaining a creative career in Scotland.
And this desire for a more manageable, self-determining nation, it also drew on some classic economic thinking, apparently.
Yes, the historian Paul Henderson Scott brought in E.F. Schumacher's ideas, specifically his famous book, Small is Beautiful. Scott pointed out that historically, many of the most prosperous, successful, and socially fair countries actually tend to be small. He emphasized the benefits of a smaller scale in terms of convenience, humanity, and manageability. The idea being that smaller nations can just be more responsive to their citizens.
And throughout all this, the movement was very careful to define its nationalism, wasn't it? As civic, internationalist, not isolationist or based on ethnicity.
That distinction was absolutely vital to them. The actress Dolina McLennan specifically called her position international nationalism. She wanted a free Scotland to, as she put it, extend its arms, non-nuclear arms across the world as a country of peace.
So not retreating, but engaging differently.
Exactly. Engaging on Scotland's own terms. Alastair Gray, again, he suggested independence opened up the possibility for Scotland to become a transparent, low-inequality society on the Scandinavian model, always looking outward for progressive examples.
And you had people like Marit Folt, with her Nordic background, offering a real-world example to counter that idea that separation automatically means cutting ties.
Yes, Folt, living and working in Scotland, but with Swedish and Norwegian roots. She stressed that separating from the UK wasn't abandonment. It was an opportunity for both cultures to flourish while maintaining strong links. She used the example of Sweden and Norway, two distinct, independent countries that thrive alongside each other with deep historical and economic connections.
So for these artists, independence wasn't about building walls at all.
Quite the opposite, it seems. It was about opening Scotland's unique cultural identity more fully to the world.
Okay, to really get a handle on how this cultural energy worked in practice, that mix of, theater, politics, humor, we probably need to zoom in on one person who really seemed to embody that blend of art and activism, Alan Bissett.
Bissett is a perfect case study. He's an award-winning writer, playwright, performer, and he consciously used his art, high-quality art, as a political tool right in the thick of the campaign.
And he had roots in that tradition, didn't he? Political theater in Scotland.
Deep roots. He was very inspired by figures like John McGrath and his famous 7.84 theater company. They specialized in creating really politically charged but accessible theater and touring it around working-class communities. Bissett saw himself in that lineage.
And crucially, his own self-description is key here, isn't it? He wasn't campaigning just for the SNP's version of independence.
No, not at all. He was absolutely rigorous about this. He stressed repeatedly, "I am not a nationalist." His core political identity was as an internationalist socialist.
Right.
So while he backed independence 100% as the way to achieve change, his ultimate aim was an independent socialist republic. And that's crucial because it specifically rejected the SNP's stated position at the time, which was to keep the monarchy and, arguably, a more establishment setup.
So he saw the SNP and Alex Salmond as leader then as sort of necessary vehicles for change, but not the final destination.
Exactly. The practical mechanism needed to unleash what he saw as the wider progressive hopes of the Scottish people. But he also fired a warning shot, didn't he? He said if an independent Scottish government, SNP, Labour, whoever, started acting like the unfair centralized governments they just got rid of, they'll be gone. Costco will no stand for it. That commitment to holding power accountable, even future independent power, was central to his democratic thinking.
And his art became this direct channel for political argument, didn't it?
Yeah.
He talked about creating a communal experience to raise political awareness.
You see it so clearly in his work from that time, his poetry, for instance. It had different tones for different moments. He wrote this really cynical, sarcastic poem called Vote Britain, which just ripped into the status quo.
Okay.
But then later, he followed up with Vote Scotland, which was this positive, uplifting, rallying cry designed to build hope and confidence. He was consciously trying to shape the emotional weather of the campaign.
And he used theater in really clever ways, too, like that metaphor in his play, The Pure, the Dead, and the Brilliant.
Yeah, with the fairies.
Ah, yes, the fairies. In that play, he uses the wee folk fairies, bogles, as a symbol for Scotland's kind of hidden, ignored potential. And the key thing is, these mythical figures only gain power, only become real when the audience votes yes in the play.
Right, symbolizing political action bringing potential to life.
Exactly. It's this powerful metaphor for how active political engagement, voting for self-determination, allows ordinary people and artists to actually seize their own collective power. As one character says, we can actually be involved new, the power to change Scotland.
And one of his most effective tools seemed to be satire. Using humor to dismantle the arguments of the No campaign, the whole Project Fear idea, in a way that maybe dry political analysis couldn't.
Oh, he was brilliant at puncturing that.
Yeah.
He directly took aim at that sneering slogan, sometimes attributed to the No side.
Yeah.
The too wee, too stupid, too poor narrative.
Right, that infamous line. In one performance piece, he had a character trying to get the audience to chant, "Too wee, too poor, too stupid," and it just immediately highlighted how ridiculous and, well, infantilizing that accusation sounded when said out loud.
And he was afraid to use big pop culture references either, like Game of Thrones.
That was a classic Bissett moment. He was mocking the exaggerated fears about border controls that the No campaign sometimes raised. He parodied the idea of building hard borders by talking about needing a mythical 100-foot wall of ice on the border, like in Game of Thrones.
Yeah, that kind of specific, funny reference cuts through the jargon, doesn't it?
Totally. It bypassed all the political speak and just made the fear-mongering look absurd to a lot of people.
He also tapped into some long-running historical resentments against Westminster, didn't he? By bringing up that controversial report.
Yes, he played a big part in bringing the Macron report back into the public consciousness. This was a report from way back in 1974, commissioned by the UK government itself. And allegedly, it concluded that the revenues from North Sea oil could make an independent Scotland as wealthy as Switzerland, a major economic powerhouse.
But the controversial part was
That the report was then, according to the narrative Bissett and others promoted, subsequently buried in a Westminster vault for 30 years. The implication being that it was deliberately hidden to suppress the economic case for independence back then.
And the power of that story isn't just the content of the report itself, it's the feeling of having been deceived, right? Economically cheated by the Union.
Precisely. It gave the grassroots Yes movement this historical justification for being deeply cynical about Westminster's motives and the economic warnings coming from the Better Together campaign. It created this potent narrative of past betrayal, which really fueled the determination to take control in the future.
And finally, he used a particularly painful Scottish sporting memory as a sort of warning to his own side, didn't he?
He did. A classic piece of Scottish self-deprecation almost. He warned Yes supporters not to skive it over the bar, basically. Not to miss the shot when faced with an open goal.
Which refers to?
It's a direct, and for many Scots, almost traumatic, reference to Ally MacLeod's 1978 World Cup football campaign. Scotland went into that tournament with huge expectations, massive confidence, only to famously crash out.
Ah, the glorious failure trope.
Exactly. Bissett was tapping into that deep-seated national anxiety, the fear of the glorious Scottish defeat. He was basically saying, look, we have a real chance here. Don't blow it like we have before. Overcome that history of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Just put the ball in the net this time.
So despite all this incredible creativity, this energy, this momentum we've been talking about from the culture movement, the fact remains, the Yes side lost the referendum in 2014. The final vote was 55.3% no to 44.7% yes.
A clear result, yeah.
Which perhaps inevitably led to some pretty sharp criticisms aimed specifically at how effective that cultural community actually was.
Absolutely. The political establishment, particularly on the winning side, was quite quick to dismiss the impact of all that cultural activity.
Yeah.
You had commentators like the writer Gareth K. Vile questioning if the creative community, being so overwhelmingly pro-independence, had just become a kind of self-sustaining bubble. Meaning they were maybe filtering out opposing views, talking mainly to themselves, and potentially ended up being out of step with public opinion more broadly.
Right. And the head of the official Better Together campaign, Blair McDougall, he had that really dismissive quote, didn't he?
He did. It became quite famous or infamous, depending on your view. He argued that you don't win elections by sitting on beanbags reciting poetry.
Ouch.
Yeah. It really captured that professional political class view, that inherent skepticism, perhaps even disdain for the kind of culturally led grassroots campaigning the national collective championed. They saw it as amateur, maybe naive, and ultimately no match for hard-nosed economics and traditional political machinery.
But if you actually look beyond just the win-loss result, the cultural input seems to have left a pretty undeniable legacy, didn't it? Something that challenges that dismissal.
It really did. Ross Katoon, the NC co-founder, he pointed out that the campaign achieved this unprecedented level of public engagement. Just the sheer number and variety of town hall meetings, cultural events, local debates was enormous. And yes, they lost the vote, but the momentum generated by the NC and groups like it contributed significantly to that huge swing towards, yes, during the campaign period, an unprecedented 20% swing, some analyses suggest.
20% swing is massive, even if it wasn't enough on the day.
It's huge. And then there's the turnout, 84.59%, the highest ever recorded for any major election or referendum in the UK in the modern era.
So you can't really call it a failure of engagement.
Not at all. It was arguably a massive success in civic mobilization, whatever the final outcome.
And Alan Bissett made that point too, didn't he? That even in defeat, something fundamental and lasting had changed psychologically for people in Scotland.
Yes, he reflected that Scots realized they had gained that agency, that awareness that they could fundamentally change their own constitutional future. He said, "For that one day, we witnessed Scotland being independent, meaning the nation had acted, had made a sovereign choice, independent of Westminster's direction."
A taste of agency.
Exactly. And the true legacy, as Colquhoun saw it, wasn't the result itself, but that enduring proactive attitude it fostered, inspiring ordinary people to get involved, do remarkable things, and maintaining that crucial spirit of exploration needed for any future political action.
And we know that cultural energy didn't just evaporate after the no vote, did it? The political commitment just sort of changed shape.
That's right. The artistic engagements certainly didn't stop. Alan Bissett, for example, confirmed his focus just shifted towards political structure. He got involved in launching a new party called RISE, which stood for Respect, Independence, Socialism, Environmentalism.
Rise, right.
It was an explicit attempt to try and channel that cultural energy, that activist base from the referendum, into a specific political alternative to the SNP, trying to push for a particular kind of independent Scotland. The fight continued, just on a different front.
So the consensus among many of those yes artists, even with the disappointment, was that the campaign itself had done something important, that had embedded art in political life.
Absolutely. They felt they had forced performance, literature, music, art, right into the heart of a major national conversation. The poet Alan Riach put it beautifully, saying, "A country is given life by its arts, and that art is the original state of independence in a homogenized world." The debate might have been constitutional on the surface, but underneath, the fight was profoundly cultural. And that cultural presence, that sense of art having a vital role in public life, that seems to have endured.
So, throughout this deep dive, we've traced the journey of that cultural engine behind the 2014 referendum. We've explored the incredible energy of the national collective and looked at the really diverse, often deeply personal reasons why hundreds of artists backed independence.
Yeah, we've really unpacked an argument that went way beyond simple political nationalism. It was rooted in these deep desires for social justice, for real democracy, self-respect, and a stronger sense of cultural self-confidence.
And that diversity of reasons, that's really the key takeaway, isn't it?
I think so. It was this multi-layered campaign about escaping that feeling of infantilization, getting rid of nuclear weapons, trying to build a fairer society free from policies they saw as destructive, and hoping to unleash this new wave of creativity, all bundled together under that banner of constitutional change.
Okay, so let's leave you, our listener, with a final thought. It comes from that acclaimed writer and artist we mentioned, Alasdair Gray. Gray, who famously turned down a knighthood on principle. He offered this incredibly thoughtful, nuanced perspective. He totally acknowledged that independence wouldn't automatically guarantee a perfect government. It wasn't, in his words, a sufficient condition for perfection.
But, and this is the crucial part, he maintained that independence was absolutely a necessary condition. Necessary for the possibility of genuine democracy to even exist, let alone thrive, in Scotland. Without it, he argued, the very structures would always prevent true self-determination.
So if full self-determination, independence, is just the necessary starting point for real democracy, what does that tell us? What does that tell us about the foundations needed for any truly representative society anywhere?
Yeah. What's a heavy lifting that still needs to be done after you achieve that necessary condition? And specifically, thinking back to our topic today, what enduring role does that artistic spirit, that constant push for a cultural dawn, play in actually achieving the kind of responsive, thriving democracy they were aiming for?
That question of necessary versus sufficient conditions, it feels relevant far beyond Scotland, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's the kind of question that keeps any national conversation going long after the votes have been counted.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the cultural heart of a truly historic campaign. We'll see you next time.